Okay. Well, hello. Here I am with Igor Perisic and Sam Shah at LinkedIn headquarters in Mountain View. And what I'd like to ask them is how they first got into social network analysis. Igor already started this story, which predates LinkedIn, so I'll let him continue.
So I'll start again. The beginning when I started within social network was in 2003.
Cool.
So it's really like in the dark ages.
Yeah.
At that time, the field was more driven by consultants, and you had these views of small networks. I was playing in the world of enterprise knowledge management. And enterprise knowledge management was you search for documents that matter, for something that a task I need to do, and for experts to help me out. And the cool thing that we had is that within each document, we could create a semantic map. So I give you a ton of document back, but I give you how this concept had linked. So that was a nice visualization, right? On the other side, we have names of people that are experts, and we felt like, well, this is kind of static. I mean, I don't know who they are, because otherwise I would have directly reached out to them. I don't know how they related to one another. So we took that and put it in the same display, because we had interactions around documents. We had the shares that we have today, so we could figure out why these two guys, or these two ladies, were part of the expert that we retrieved back. And then it created a map. It created one of these social maps. So that for me was my aha moment. Whoa, because small startup, 40, 50 people, you read the map and say, yeah, that's right, that's exactly how we work. It did work.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a small group setup, 40, 50.
Uh-huh.
The company didn't make it, so we stopped doing this. Now it's way different. Now it's maps of hundreds of millions of users. But there the difference is that you get to play with the real society, and you can actually see how it's alive, how it changes. That's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm. So one thing I've been telling students is how it's different when you slice a small network and people can easily recognize, oh yes, these are actually the groups that work together and so on. I would imagine that with a large network, you have a lot of overlaps from individuals changing companies. Does it make the same amount of sense? Or do you need to slice it before you can really work with it?
I think Sam and I can talk about like how many pixels are there on the screen? Certainly less than 180 million, depending on the resolution. So if I put a dot per member, or I put a dot per member on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, well, you have the screen that's full. So you have to slice and dice it to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And through that, you start getting actually the nice signal.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the challenge comes in actually how you're going to slice it too, because and as we've run into these problems where you slice it in a certain manner and then you lose the information that you really wanted to look at. You need to slice it in a different manner. So you look at like LinkedIn in the Bay Area performs very differently than it does, say, in New Zealand. And looking at that is actually, and figuring out how you're going to slice it is quite a challenge.
Uh-huh.
And it's also lead to me, my background is stats. And in the old days, it was like the myth of the average man. There's an average person, there's an average date. Well, the average man is half female, half male. The average family is 1.5 kids. That doesn't exist. The slice and dicing makes me remind that there's not an average user.
Mm-hmm.
There's not an average thing that you look at. There are different aspects. There are students, there are job seekers, there are professionals, there are this, there are that, there are that. Facebook, you can have their teenagers, there are early teens, there are late teens. They're all different.
Was that a jab?
No, definitely not. Actually, one thing that I noticed is that it's drastically changing. And I don't know if, did we meet in 2005 at that Microsoft meeting on social networks?
I'm not sure.
They brought a bunch of researchers at that time,
Uh-huh.
and they brought kids. 13, 14-year-olds, and they start saying, oh, I do this on IM, I do this on MySpace, I do this on the phone, I do this on that. And we were all flabbergasted. Well, what? You're doing that on this? Well, and it was like, you don't break up with someone on IM, you call them up, or you don't do this on the, I forgot what it was.
Uh-huh.
These individuals are now our users.
Mm-hmm.
And we all benefit from the perception of prevalence of social networks. That it's not something, oh, I don't know what to do on that. It's almost inbred into their DNA. Whereas for my generation, I would go and look at my sister. What is a social network? Why this? What that? My dad. So that changes drastically. So it's not the whole ecosystem sort of adapted to it. What will be in 5 years, I don't know, but it becomes so much easier to deal with it, that people actually see what they want from it, much easier than us telling them what they should look at.
And I guess there's kind of a two-part question. To what extent is individuals' behavior when they use a network such as LinkedIn different from how they might, or the same as what they might be doing when they're doing regular networking or hanging out? And also, to what extent, such behavior might inform the algorithms that you use in trying to facilitate those interactions? Do you try to simulate what might happen in an offline interaction? Looking at Sam.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's LinkedIn is a little bit different in that, it's your information is inherently public. This is like, you're putting your CV out there. You want to be found. Like, that's one of our core kind of principles of having this identity on the web. So like, when you have that kind of dynamic, things change, right? Obviously, people are much more conscious about what they want to present. And then they change their behavior, I think, and to kind of reflect that, which it would do differently, say, in an offline kind of setting. It's I don't know, it's hard to actually understand what people would do, like the differences between that and kind of offline. I don't think we've actually have a really true, crisp understanding of that right now.
Well, what about, not right now as we're recording, but in 2 weeks, the students will be learning about Milgram's experiment and passing messages six times. I think it doesn't maybe happen naturally, but if LinkedIn would be a place where you might facilitate people actually navigating the network. To what extent do you see that, and what kinds of smarts things just kind of blow up, right? The number of friends and friends and friends.
Again, 2003, there were 3 startups in social networks: Friendster, Spoke, and LinkedIn. If you look at Spoke was about facilitating business transaction. I'm a salesperson. I want to sell to company X. I don't know anybody in company X, but who do I know that knows someone? So it's kind of similar to Stanley's experiment. Like, how do I get my message to that person while I don't know who that person is?
Right.
In this case, you have the setup of who you're trying to target. I always felt that would be the most successful startup in that domain. Of course, it hasn't. So I was wrong. I'm fine with it. We have a couple of products that we're looking into. One, the Pathfinder, which is actually trying to say, okay, this is how we are interconnected between A and B. So making that path explicit and making you the choices of which path you want to go down in order to convey a message or do anything across the board. And it's slightly tricky because you have multiple hops to go through, multiple types of connections, whether you're directly connected to the person, whether you share a group with that person, whether you live in the same area. All of these sort of interplay differently within the algorithm. And we're still learning how to actually make that thing better.
So any previews? Not that you have to give anything.
Nope, unfortunately.
No? Okay.
But that's one of these these cool things when you work in places like we were talking before. We do have the data to try things out. Most of our ideas don't make it out because it's either it's extremely hard, or the signal is not there, or the iterations and it's going to take longer than we thought, and some do. And when those do, sometimes they're extremely surprising to us. We just launched 2 products, which we laugh about it every day now, which are extremely viral, and they behave virally differently. And to understand why is actually a very fascinating question to think about.
So tell me more. It sounds like you had something to do with this.
Oh yeah, so we did this thing called endorsements, where you can provide kind of a lightweight thumbs up, sort of, to basically on colleagues' skills and expertise. And what we really it's really interesting to see that kind of social dynamic and that diffusion kind of happen as people slowly get to, I'm going to go and look at my colleagues and figure out what skills they have, and actually go and say, okay, this guy, Igor's really good at stats, I'm going to give him that. And then what does that actually change Igor's perception, and how that actually spreads throughout the entire network. And that thing has been growing immensely, much more than we actually even anticipated. And people are really in tune to that kind of thing. Another thing that we
So where do you get the expertise? So I've seen a little bit
yeah.
of this activity. But
Oh, yeah, it's
Very
not
secret.
that's another.
yeah, we're only for you.
Off the record.
Yeah, it's only for people that are watching this. No one else is going to know. So you can do a few things, right? I mean, I think you can look at their profile information and be like, okay, based on the descriptions, you can do some sort of tagging around that. There's a lot of things you can do also on social network as well to be like, hey, what do my friends know? What do my connections know that can basically drive what I know? And then you can also do the same thing about your company, your title. And you bring all those pieces of information together, you can have a decent representation of what some skills someone might know, right? And it's obviously not going to be perfect, but then you present it to the user, and then they kind of go and refine that. And it's been wildly successful using that kind of approach.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So kind of friend sourcing expertise.
Yeah, sort of.
Yeah.
It's sort of like playing on the homophily thing. Like
Yeah.
but people with that skill tend to sort of cluster together on top of it with a professional network, so you would have those connections,
Right.
and you let them, as you said, that source of data percolate up.
Uh-huh. So I've done a little bit of research, though, on what people say publicly and what they say privately. Have you thought about that at all? Publicly I say Igor is an expert, but...
And privately? It goes back to one other question that you had a little bit earlier. The difference is that everything that you do on LinkedIn is tailored. I mean, it has your voice to it, and you identify through it. You're not anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
You're not using a weird kind of name on that. It's really you with your name.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, affects what knowledge goes through the network.
Mm-hmm.
It affects how you express it, and it affects how you are not expressing some things, which makes it very interesting to sort of
at
infer
least
it.
for you guys, you might be able to make some inferences when people don't endorse, right?
That would be a yes. I would think I could think about a couple of algorithms for it.
Mm-hmm.
The little bit difference is that on your profile you get full control about what it is out there.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm saying you're not good at something, well, you get to control whether you want to show it or not, which
right.
probably we won't, right?
Yeah.
So but then on the other hand, a lot of the targeting that we have or recommendations could
Mm-hmm.
take that into consideration. Yeah.
Okay, so this was part one. You said there were two things that went viral.
The other one is we just launched a way for having richer content on the site. So normally you would have like a small, almost a network feed, which is about 140 to a bit more characters. And we give the opportunity to some individual to say, well, you're an influencer list. I mean, why don't you use a longer post? Almost like a blog type.
Uh-huh.
And again, it's tailored to, it's keyed on your identity. And we ask about 140, 150 influencers to message. And these are from one side the Romneys and the Obamas today, to the Richard Branson, who's the most popular one, to the head of the World Bank, to a bunch of individuals that are whose opinion you might want to read from time to time,
Mm-hmm.
and you hope from them to get very good content for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another one. That now, well, you see this list of individuals, let me follow that person,
Mm-hmm.
to get access to their postings, and or to get dynamically access to their posting, because you can always go, it's public, but to dynamically hear that, to be notified, and that has a different way to progress through the network. Because I follow, let's say, you or him, then you see, oh, he's following him and her, or maybe I should check what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
and has a different way to diffuse compared to the previous one.
Okay. Yeah, sounds neat. So what's diffusing is the following,
Yes.
as opposed to this activity, which you're still kind of curating. You're
Correct.
identifying. Cool.
But at the high level, if you look at it, a posting on an influencer, it's a follow. So it's something new. It's the follower post influencer.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is the endorsement. Oh, there's such a thing as an endorsement. What is it? I didn't know it was before. What are these skills things that I knew or I didn't know that was before?
Mm-hmm.
And they are both very, especially today, because it's been what, about 3 weeks, 4 weeks that we started endorsements?
Yeah, 3 weeks.
And an influencer is about a week. So today you're really seeing this thing explode through the network.
Mm-hmm. And I guess identifying influencers, you mentioned, maybe you can use these endorsements and so on. Do you actually, how does one do that?
As it always happens, sometimes we are wildly more successful than we thought we were going to be. So we were rather careful to create very well at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So we went through a high level of editorial review. So okay, there's going to be just a few of them. And there were a couple of things that needed to happen. One is that they were willing to actually do this posting so it seems dynamic and not like I'm posting one every year. Mm-hmm. So that you have this mechanism. And then what we did is, well, let us get ready for that second wave. If it works well, let's figure it out. And there we use multiple signals to figure out who is a potential influencer within the network. Part of the signals that we were using is the skills map. Mm-hmm. Part of the signal that we're using is that people are sharing content on LinkedIn. What happens to that content that they share? And people share content within the LinkedIn share button on the web. Mm-hmm. What happens to that content? Is some just being static or is something else being picked up? So they were already acting like influencers without them really knowing that they were, because they had a crowd that would actually follow what they clicked on, mm-hmm. or what they acted upon.
Okay. Cool. So yeah, we'll be getting to influencers in a few weeks. So I remember you talking in Dublin a few months ago now about predicting where people are going to move next for their next job, and somehow also incorporating geography. So,
for example, the interesting thing that we had done these maps for the US. Now I'm invited to go to Dublin, so I go to Dublin and say, I don't have the maps for Europe. And unfortunately, we couldn't refresh them quickly enough. And even after the meeting, some individuals that were in the audience were part of the labor bureau of something in Europe. Mm-hmm. What we were doing is more like, well, from your resume, I know where you're working, I know where you're going to work. Mm-hmm. And from that, I can infer maps of, are you sticking to a certain region, or are you willing to get a job opening into another place? If you look at it, it says, well, the migration pattern in real life. Mm-hmm. And we use part of that signal to figure out which job I should recommend to you. Mm-hmm. It's one of the things that I wish we would do much more on LinkedIn, much more looking into this labor market. Uh-huh. One thing that recently we talked about was this skill gap. How come some people are not employed when you have so many job openings? Is there a gap between the skills of what you need for this job compared to what you have? Mm-hmm. Another part is, well...
You take some Coursera classes.
No, that actually... No, seriously, that's one of the things that we were trying to figure out. Well, if there is such a gap, mm-hmm. how do you provide that visualization to individuals? Say, I'm looking for a job X, and well, there's not that many job X on the market, but there's this job Y on the market, which is close to the job X. But this is the skills that you miss. How do I get these skills? Well, I can work on this, but I cannot get the job, so I cannot work on this. So how do I get it? Well, classes, courses, books, online this, online that, mm-hmm. and provide a way to actually get that, or how to get into this place.
Or maybe you can discover step companies. So maybe you can't directly go from...
Say now, wait a minute, I'm going to mark that down. Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was really interesting in the context of veterans, for example. Like we have, we were working on these things where, veterans come, they leave the military, they have a set of skills, but what skills do those map to in non-military contexts? And, what can a radio operator in the military, what are they really qualified to do, and how can you help them get a job, which can more utilize kind of the skills they use in the military? And that was actually a really interesting kind of thing to look at and deep dive into.
Mm-hmm. So I guess there's still this question of the textbook social network analysis, and then social network analysis that scales to the amount of data that you have. And Igor, you said a little bit about it. Is there anything more that the students might want to brace themselves for? Once they're done with the class.
I think almost everything you read in the textbook will break down at scale. We've noticed that quite a bit. I think a good classical example of that on LinkedIn is we have this people you might know feature, which tries to go and find the relationships on the social network that you might form. And you might think, hey, I'm just going to go and look at second degree, close triangles, and figure that out. It turns out that's really hard to do when you have 185 million members. Actually doing these things at scale and actually figuring out these relationships becomes very difficult. And it becomes very humbling. I mean, what works at 10 million quickly breaks down when you get to 50 million or 100 million things. And you have to think of different kind of approaches to do some of this stuff. Some of it can be parallelized, but a lot of the stuff actually cannot. So you have to think maybe about approximations or other things you can do, or really put domain knowledge into the problem to really understand how you can get these algorithms to scale. Quadratic is not generally good for us.
But just to say that reading something in a book and going to a course still matters. It's still important.
I'm not saying don't. The theory is very important to understand, and then to basically understand the applications of it, and then to really go distill and deeper dive into these problems.
Mm-hmm. The way that I was viewing it is being a statistician. The background is a bit math, so I started as a mathematician, then a statistician, and I'm now doing data mining. And there's a fundamental difference between A, B, and C. Mm-hmm. And math is geared into the mathematical model. Axioms, theorem, lemma, everything is true or false to some extent. A statistician, nothing is true or false. Everything is uncertain. But you still use math as the tools that get you towards figuring out what is optimal and what isn't optimal. And you understand the methodology. Then you go to billions of data or millions of this, and suddenly even doing a median is very complicated. And you go back to the average. And you say, I know the median is better as a point estimate than the average, but hey, you know what, I can only do an average fast enough. Mm-hmm. So I have to live with it. But then at that point of time, what you do in the back of your mind, you know what is the fundamental assumptions of different techniques. And you can use them and tweak them a little bit. So you're not doing the perfect thing, but at scale you have no options. But you know what is the impact of the change. And you can maybe correct for that bias or not. Because then at one point of time, the data is just way too big and way too much.
Cool. Well, so those were some of the challenges. Anything else that we may have missed?
There is beauty at scale. It's not, we shouldn't be afraid of scale. It's really fascinating to see things that when they have ton of traffic, because it gives it its dynamism, it gives it its diffusion signal to it. And because it's at scale, the other beauty is that it's hard. And because it's hard, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. So it's a challenge that people should pick up and not be afraid of. There are tons of things that would fail, but it's a very, very fascinating thing to play on.
Yeah, I think the other thing is to add to what you were saying, is you can learn different things at scale. Things that, with a small amount of data, it becomes very difficult to understand, but when you have a large amount of data, say that LinkedIn has, you can see patterns that you would not necessarily see, which is actually, I think, very interesting to kind of go and play with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. So really large things under the microscope.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
And the other thing, these are fascinating times to play within that area. Mm-hmm. Some years ago, even if you had the thought of doing it, you couldn't, which is why Friendster failed. And it's the right time to actually, it's a new door that's opened up into what we can think about.
Cool. Well, maybe we can end with that. Thanks very much,
Thank
Igor
you.
and Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.